Good day, everyone. Today we are going to talk about the challenges Malaysian primary teachers face in the implementation of special education, inclusive practices in regular schools. Before we dive into the contents, allow me to introduce our group members and myself. We are from Group 2. I'm Yao Lacey, and they are my team members, Yvonne Chan and Chan Boon Seng. First of all, let's look at the problem statement. What is the problem statement of the research? The problem statement is regular primary school teachers in Malaysia struggle to support students with special educational needs due to a lack of training and resources, negative attitudes towards SEN among educators and parents, and curriculum misalignment. These issues hinder inclusive teaching in regular primary schools, affecting both special needs pupils and their typically developing peers. Without addressing these issues, inclusive and equitable learning environments for all students remain unattainable. Thus, identifying and addressing these issues is essential to implementing inclusive special education in Malaysian regular schools. Next, let's look at the research objectives. First, to assess the challenges faced by regular primary school teachers regarding training and resources provided for supporting students with SEN, educators and parents' attitude towards SEN in regular primary schools, aligning Malaysia's curriculum with the requirements of students with SEN. Second, investigate the ways in which these challenges affect the efficacy of inclusive education. Third, propose strategies for surmounting these challenges to improve the execution of inclusive practices. Now, let's look at the research questions. The research questions are: what challenges do regular primary school teachers face in terms of training and resources, educators and parents' attitudes towards SEN, and Malaysia's curriculum? Second, how do these challenges affect the comprehensive efficacy of inclusive education in Malaysian regular primary school amongst regular students? Last but not least, what recommendations can be made to overcome the obstacles to inclusive special education in regular primary schools? Next, I will pass to my team member, Ms. Yvonne. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. Right now, to address the points that Evelyn has raised earlier on objectives and problems, we are moving on to the literature review my group has examined. Now, we will look at a few areas on what inclusive education is, principles of inclusive education in Malaysia, what the literature explores, and how findings are gathered. So first of all, inclusive education is about equity in education, as Evelyn has mentioned. Every student is given the same opportunities to learn, now regardless of things like their background, abilities, characteristics, or ethnicity, or even disabilities. Now, this is no exception to even special needs students. There are principles grounded within all this inclusive education, such as social justice, equity, and diversity, to create a learning space where every student feels valued, supported, and welcomed. Now, the Malaysian government also advocated for this implementation, where students with special needs are expected to be integrated into mainstream schools. And the notion was pushed ahead through the Education Act 1996, which established a form of framework for inclusive classrooms. Now, this move led to the refinement of educational policies, and we believe that the government has been working with the teachers to train them to support special needs, as noted by UNESCO in 2018. Now, our literature review gathers findings of this topic through examining a large number of journals, articles, and research papers, as we seek to have more clarification on the challenges primary school teachers face through this implementation, We're looking at its impact, gaps, and recommendations we can put forward to overcome the issues we have identified. Right. Next, we will look at SEN legislation and policies in Malaysia. And we will touch on, namely, the Malaysian Education Blueprint, the Zero Rejection Policy, and the No Child Left Behind in lieu with IEP for SEN. So in the blueprint, our government laid out plans to support the notion of including special needs learners into mainstream schools. Then, in 2018, they developed something called the Zero Rejection Policies. Now, special needs learners were given their rights to study in regular schools. And of course, there is discrimination happening. And to address this discrimination, they started to adopt the No Child Left Behind notion, where no child is refused enrollment in any government or government-assisted schools of their choice. Now, of course, this sort of implementation, though good, does come with its difficulties and challenges, and problems do exist. So, next, we will have to look at the challenges that teachers face in the implementation of SEN practices. And these issues include planning and providing individual education plan called the IEP, teacher training, lack of knowledge, strategies, and cooperation from parents. Now, the IEP came back with findings of being too time-consuming to develop. Teachers also lack proper, sufficient, detailed trainings. And to make matters worse, the format just kept changing, and the practicum was just too short, 3 months only. It was also found that parents refused cooperation in many aspects of their special needs children. Now, okay, as we move on through this research, we've identified gaps for future directions, and they include looking at the adequacy of teacher training programs. Do we have enough training programs for special needs teachers? We also want to look at challenges in inquiry probe on stakeholders. In fact, there are very limited studies on what stakeholders think, what their perspective is. Stakeholders including the parents, administrators, teachers, students, right? We would also have to look at the impact of SEN policies on student outcomes. There is also very limited studies to examine strategies and techniques to support SEN inclusive practices. Now, in conclusion and to wrap things up, although there are many literature available to enlighten us on the challenges Malaysian primary teachers face in the implementation of special education inclusive practices in schools, there are still many gaps to close. And it is important to look into providing, number one, more detailed teacher training programs. Number two, exploring stakeholder attitudes. Number three, the impact of SEN policies on student outcomes. Number four, strategies to overcome the constraints of developing individualized educational plans. And our group believe that we need more studies. We need to have more studies on examining strategies and techniques to support SEN inclusive practices in schools, right? And thank you. And on to you, Chan.
Okay. Hi. Now I'd like to introduce to the research methodology. Our study employ a mixed method research approach as advocated by Pons and Pagan in 2015. This dual approach enables us to delve deep into the challenges of inclusive education by combining quantitative surveys among primary school teachers with qualitative interviews involving teachers and parents of both SEN and regular students. The rationale behind this choice was to gain a holistic understanding of the complexities surrounding inclusive education from multiple stakeholder perspectives. In the first phase of our research, we will conduct surveys with a significant sample of primary school teachers. These surveys aim to assess their views on the current challenges in inculcating inclusive education, including the availability of resources and the effectiveness of their training. Moving to the qualitative aspect, we will select a number of teachers for semi-structured interviews to obtain a deeper insight into their experiences, perceptions, and the barriers they face in implementing inclusive education. Additionally, we will conduct interviews with parents of SEN and regular students. These discussions were pivotal in understanding the impact of inclusivity from a familial standpoint, exploring notion of fairness and gathering recommendations directly from those whose lives are touched by these policies and practices. Our analysis process was twofold. The survey results will provide a clear picture of the predominant challenges, highlighting areas such as resource requirements and training needs. On the qualitative side, thematic analysis of the interview transcripts will reveal recurring themes related to challenges, strategies employed, and suggestions for fostering a more inclusive educational environment. In this section, which is our finding, we will have an integrated view of the inclusive education challenges, organically discussing quantitative data and qualitative insights from teachers and parents. It will include learning on the challenges related to improved teacher training, availability of better resources, and a shifted perception of SEN students. This area will also report the parents' perspective on the fairness and effectiveness of inclusive education. Following insights from the two data sets and a countenance of parental opinions, this section synthesizes the critical challenges and recommends comprehensive evidence-based solutions. Some recommendations will touch on policy reform, professional development programs, and additional community integration approaches for a better learning setting. Thank you all for your attention.